Article 370 applies to enclosures designed for electrical equipment, and this includes both weatherheads and set screw connectors. A key element within Article 370 is the requirement that all enclosures must be adequately weatherproof when installed in locations exposed to wet conditions. Weatherheads play a crucial role in protecting electrical equipment from environmental elements. Their design, specifically the downward-facing opening, is instrumental in preventing water ingress into the enclosure. Because of this inherent design feature, weatherheads are often permitted for use in wet locations without necessarily requiring a specific listing designating them for wet location use. In contrast, set screw connectors generally do not offer the same level of weather protection as weatherheads. The primary reason for this difference lies in the orientation of the connector opening, which typically faces upward. This upward-facing orientation makes set screw connectors more susceptible to water intrusion. As a result, when set screw connectors are intended for use in wet locations, they must be explicitly listed and approved for such applications. The requirement for set screw connectors to be listed for wet locations does not conflict with the stipulations outlined in Article 90 of the National Electrical Code, (NEC). Article 90 mandates that all electrical equipment must be approved for use in the specific location where it is installed. This means that if set screw connectors are installed in a wet location, they must have the appropriate listing indicating their suitability for this type of environment. The responsibility for ensuring that electrical equipment is properly approved for its intended location rests with the electrical inspector. To make this determination, the inspector relies on both Article 370 and Article 90 of the NEC, along with any other applicable standards or local codes. The inspector evaluates the equipment and its installation to confirm that it meets all relevant safety requirements. Here is a more detailed breakdown of the relevant factors to consider. Firstly, Article 370 covers enclosures for electrical equipment, emphasizing protection against environmental factors. Secondly, weatherheads are designed to prevent water from entering electrical systems. Thirdly, set screw connectors require specific listing for wet locations due to their design. Fourthly, Article 90 mandates approval of equipment based on the installation location. Fifthly, the electrical inspector ensures compliance with the relevant codes and standards. Now let's delve into the specific requirements and considerations for electrical installations in wet locations, focusing on weatherheads, set screw connectors, and the relevant articles of the National Electrical Code, (NEC). Electrical installations in wet locations pose unique challenges due to the increased risk of corrosion, electrical shock, and equipment failure. Ensuring the safety and reliability of these installations requires careful attention to detail, adherence to established codes and standards, and the use of appropriate materials and equipment. The National Electrical Code, (NEC), provides comprehensive guidelines for electrical installations, including specific requirements for wet locations. Article 370 of the NEC, as previously mentioned, addresses enclosures for electrical equipment and outlines the requirements for their construction, installation, and use. This article is particularly relevant when dealing with installations in wet locations, as it mandates the use of enclosures that are specifically designed and listed for such environments. Weatherheads are specialized fittings used to provide a weatherproof transition between overhead service conductors and the service entrance conductors that enter a building or structure. They are typically installed at the point where the service conductors pass through the exterior wall or roof of the building. The primary function of a weatherhead is to prevent water from entering the electrical system, thereby protecting the conductors, connections, and other electrical equipment from moisture damage and corrosion. The design of a weatherhead typically includes a downward-facing opening that allows the service conductors to enter the enclosure while minimizing the risk of water ingress. This downward orientation helps to deflect rainwater and other forms of moisture, preventing them from entering the electrical system. Because of this inherent design feature, weatherheads are often permitted for use in wet locations without requiring a specific listing for wet location use. However, it is essential to ensure that the weatherhead is properly installed and sealed to maintain its weatherproof integrity. Set screw connectors are commonly used to terminate electrical conductors to enclosures, equipment, and other devices. They provide a mechanical connection between the conductor and the termination point, ensuring a reliable electrical connection. However, unlike weatherheads, set screw connectors are not inherently designed to be weatherproof. The opening in the connector typically faces upward, which makes it more susceptible to water intrusion. As a result, when set screw connectors are used in wet locations, they must be specifically listed and approved for such applications. This listing indicates that the connector has been tested and evaluated to ensure that it can withstand the environmental conditions present in wet locations without compromising its electrical performance or safety. The requirement for set screw connectors to be listed for wet locations is not arbitrary. It is based on the understanding that these connectors are more vulnerable to water ingress than weatherheads. Without a specific listing, there is a higher risk of water entering the connector, leading to corrosion, electrical faults, and potential safety hazards. Article 90 of the NEC provides the general requirements for electrical installations, including the scope, purpose, and administration of the code. It emphasizes the importance of using approved equipment and materials and following established installation practices to ensure the safety and reliability of electrical systems. Article 90.4 specifically addresses the enforcement of the NEC and states that the authority having jurisdiction, HOJ, which is typically the electrical inspector, is responsible for interpreting and enforcing the code. The AHJ has the authority to approve or disapprove electrical installations based on their compliance with the NEC and other applicable standards. In the context of wet locations, the AHJ plays a crucial role in ensuring that the appropriate equipment and installation methods are used. The inspector will review the plans, inspect the installation, and verify that all equipment is properly listed and approved for use in wet locations. The inspector may also require additional measures, such as sealing or weatherproofing, to ensure that the installation meets the requirements of the NEC and provides adequate protection against moisture. The NEC provides specific definitions for various types of locations, including wet locations, damp locations, and dry locations. A wet location is defined as an area where exposure to water or other liquids is frequent or prolonged. This includes locations that are subject to direct rainfall, such as outdoor areas, as well as locations that are subject to splashing or dripping water, such as car washes or industrial facilities. Damp locations are defined as areas that are subject to moderate degrees of moisture, such as partially protected locations under canopies, marquees, or roof overhangs. Dry locations are defined as areas that are not normally subject to dampness or wetness. The classification of a location as wet, damp, or dry is critical in determining the appropriate equipment and installation methods to use. For example, equipment installed in a wet location must be specifically listed for wet location use, while equipment installed in a dry location may not require such listing. In addition to the general requirements for wet locations, the NEC also includes specific requirements for certain types of equipment and installations. For example, Article 430 addresses motors and motor circuits and includes specific requirements for motors installed in wet locations. These requirements may include the use of weatherproof enclosures, corrosion-resistant materials, and special sealing methods to protect the motor from moisture damage. Article 680 addresses swimming pools, fountains, and similar installations and includes extensive requirements for electrical safety in these environments. These requirements are designed to minimize the risk of electrical shock and ensure the safety of swimmers and other individuals who may come into contact with the water. In summary, electrical installations in wet locations require careful attention to detail, adherence to established codes and standards, and the use of appropriate materials and equipment. Weatherheads and set screw connectors are two types of fittings that are commonly used in these installations, and each has its own specific requirements for listing and use. The electrical inspector plays a crucial role in ensuring that these installations meet the requirements of the NEC and provide adequate protection against moisture and other environmental hazards. Furthermore, the NEC provides detailed guidelines on electrical safety in wet locations. Firstly, use equipment listed for wet locations. Secondly, ensure proper sealing and weatherproofing. Thirdly, follow specific requirements for motors in wet locations as described in Article 430. Fourthly, adhere to Article 680 for swimming pools and fountains. Fifthly, the electrical inspector enforces code compliance. Consider the selection of appropriate materials for wet locations. Firstly, use corrosion-resistant materials. Secondly, consider stainless steel, copper, or coated aluminum. Thirdly, avoid dissimilar metals that can cause galvanic corrosion. Fourthly, regularly inspect and maintain electrical equipment. Fifthly, address any signs of corrosion or damage promptly. Also, here is how to ensure proper installation techniques in wet environments. Firstly, use weatherproof enclosures and fittings. Secondly, seal all conduit entries and connections. Thirdly, provide adequate drainage to prevent water accumulation. Fourthly, protect wiring from physical damage. Fifthly, ground electrical systems properly to minimize shock hazards. Regular inspection and maintenance are critical in wet locations. Firstly, inspect electrical equipment regularly for signs of corrosion or damage. Secondly, test ground fault circuit interrupters, GFCIs, periodically. Thirdly, replace any damaged or corroded components promptly. Fourthly, keep electrical panels and enclosures clean and dry. Fifthly, ensure proper ventilation to reduce moisture buildup. Also consider grounding and bonding requirements. Firstly, properly ground all electrical equipment. Secondly, bond metal components to create a low impedance path for fault current. Thirdly, use appropriate grounding and bonding connectors. Fourthly, test grounding and bonding systems regularly. Fifthly, comply with NEC Article 250 for grounding and bonding requirements. When dealing with underground wiring, there are additional considerations. Firstly, use direct burial cables or cables and conduit. Secondly, ensure proper burial depth according to NEC requirements. Thirdly, protect cables from physical damage. Fourthly, use waterproof connectors and splices. Fifthly, mark the location of underground wiring clearly. Here is more on wiring methods for wet locations. Firstly, use wiring methods approved for wet locations, such as Type UF cable or rigid metal conduit. Secondly, support wiring properly to prevent sagging or damage. Thirdly, protect wiring from abrasion or physical damage. Fourthly, seal conduit ends to prevent water entry. Fifthly, comply with NEC Chapter 3 for wiring methods and materials. Consider the use of ground fault circuit interrupters, GFCIs. Firstly, install GFCIs in all circuits serving wet locations. Secondly, test GFCIs monthly to ensure proper operation. Thirdly, replace faulty GFCIs immediately. Fourthly, understand the limitations of GFCIs and use them in conjunction with other safety measures. Fifthly, comply with NEC Article 210.8 for GFCI protection requirements. When dealing with lighting fixtures, ensure proper selection and installation. Firstly, use lighting fixtures listed for wet locations. Secondly, install fixtures in a way that prevents water entry. Thirdly, use corrosion-resistant hardware. Fourthly, provide adequate ventilation to prevent moisture buildup. Fifthly, comply with NEC Article 410 for lighting fixture requirements. Consider electrical panels and enclosures. Firstly, use enclosures listed for wet locations, such as NEMA 4 or 4X enclosures. Secondly, seal all openings and conduit entries. Thirdly, provide adequate drainage to prevent water accumulation. Fourthly, protect enclosures from physical damage. Fifthly, comply with NEC Article 312 for panelboard and enclosure requirements. When dealing with electrical connections, ensure watertight connections. Firstly, use waterproof connectors and splices. Secondly, seal connections with silicone or other sealant. Thirdly, protect connections from physical damage. Fourthly, use heat shrink tubing to insulate and protect connections. Fifthly, comply with NEC Article 110.14 for electrical connection requirements.